The parasitic nature of the CIA and psychiatry.
The CIA has tortured, murdered, raped, poisoned and harassed tens of thousands of victims over the 7 decades of the agency's existence. Many times these crimes have been committed with the assistance of psychiatrists and psychologists. Some were directly in the employ of the agency, others received grants, and designed their bizarre experimental treatments to answer agency questions about brainwashing. Still others, nominally independent, gaslighted their patients, thinking they were assisting national security. And sometimes these therapists were just willfully ignorant, preferring to label their patient paranoid, rather than believe the government was conducting this type of illegal surveillance and harassment. This continues to this day. Mohammed Momtaz Al-Azhari in Florida was warrantlessly surveilled by a fleet of 9 Cessna aircraft for nearly 429 hours. They took 935 separate videos of him. The Intercept wrote. The planes also followed Al-Azhari during routine events, including getting mail from his mailbox, visiting his sister, and going to an urgent care clinic, and even once when he checked himself into an inpatient mental health facility. The only day the FBI didn't surveil Al-Azhari by air during this period was the one during which he was receiving inpatient mental health services. They deliberately stopped his surveillance when it might become obvious to doctors and psychologists that he was not being paranoid. These types of programs are more suited to 18th-century France, when one could be locked away with a letter de cachet from the king, or the Communist Soviet Union when dissidents were imprisoned in psychiatric wards, the mental hospital becoming the Gulag. It is also deeply troubling when one considers the incidence of mental illness and suicide by spouses and family members of CIA officers. It is obvious to any observer that the moral laxity that allows for murder of civilians abroad extends to domestic abuse and murder at home. Each decade of the agency's existence has had its unique abuses. Often the public does not hear about them until decades later.
The agency has a policy of lie and deny.
The details are not known until finally uncovered through lawsuits, investigations, and FOIA requests. Examples of CIA abuses using psychiatry. LSD and other psychosis-inducing drugs tested on unwitting civilians and CIA co-workers, culminating in the death of Dr. Frank Olson. CIA-funded experiments on unwitting patients at Montreal's Allan Memorial Institute, inducing them to stay asleep for months at a time, which disabled some patients for the rest of their lives. LSD experiments on prisoners, including the criminal Whitey Bulger, who went on to become a mass murderer. Experiments on Vietnamese prisoners of war violating the Geneva Convention. Prisoners received electronic implants in their brain and were later murdered to conceal the evidence.
Deadly experiments on West German civilians.
CIA experiments at Harvard on undergraduates, including Ted Kaczynski, who later went on to become the Unabomber. CIA-funded experiments at Vermont State Hospital, where Dr. Robert W. Hyde abused patients. CIA-funded Dr. Harold Abramson, who tested LSD on children aged 6 to 11.
Le Pain Maudit. CIA laced bread in France with LSD, causing mass psychosis and 5 deaths.
CIA funded Charles Manson's Dr. and Manson's recruitment of people to his cult. Project Artichoke, where they tested extreme temperatures and electric shock on expendables in South Korea, murdering some. Psychiatrists took part in torture of CIA prisoners at black sites around the world and have been implicated in war crimes and kidnapping.
Secret programs using Voice of God technology on unwitting victims.
FBI discussed using it at Waco with David Koresh's cult, but ostensibly decided against it.
Programs using microwave, sonic weapons, now being used against the CIA with Havana Syndrome. Sources: